You're listening to Two Babies in a Business, a podcast about, let me just scroll up my page because I still, after 70 episodes.
It was like a really kind of like a shaky, shocking start there. It's all good.
Okay, let's try. You're listening to Two Babies in a
You are listening. I'm not sure if you're happy about it, but you're listening. Hopefully.
Two Babies in a Business, a podcast about business, marketing, growth, strategy, staff, clients, babies, and marriage. And I'm Christina. This is Peter. I almost said I'm Peter.
Oh, good.
We're founders and leaders of CIPR Communications. And this is the reason why you shouldn't record, 6 in a row. Give yourself some fresh eyes, take a break.
We are catching up. We were a little behind, so we're catching up. All good. Here we go. Anyways, so today we're talking about what is stakeholder relations, right?
Well, I've kind of broadened it.
It's
like, what is public relations?
Yes.
I think the last several episodes, we've been focusing on media relations, which I think is a core component of public relations and what most people associate with that. But if we go all the way back up to our second episode of this series, we talked about your public relations strategy and different tactics and that piece. And I thought it would be good before we round out this series to just kind of go back and talk about all of the different aspects of public relations there actually are.
Right. So why don't we start off with you telling us, giving us a rundown of various different types of, publics that you can be relating with these days.
Oh boy. Okay. So there are 4 that I would like to cover.
Yeah.
So let's start with one and we can kind of riff off one another from there, but I'm going to skip media relations because we've been talking so much about
Been there, done that.
So let's go to government relations.
Yes, the old government.
The old government. So the definition that we use here at CIPR when we talk to clients about government relations is this. Government relations specifically focuses on how an organization interacts with the government and its various divisions and officials. This area of public relations helps build relationships and positive interactions between an organization and government officials.
Yeah, and I guess that's an interesting definition because as you're talking about that, I was sort of thinking about advocacy, which may not necessarily be the same thing as what you're talking about there, but could be. So why don't we kind of start with just kind of breaking that down a little bit, because like I was a lobbyist for many years. That's my background and where I cut my teeth in the world. Well, ish. But and I worked for organizations that were like lobbying government on very specific things. They wanted to get things done. They needed legislation changed, and that was a very different type of government relations than, just being a company that wants to have a good relationship with their MLA and their MP and their member and their local councillor. So that when, like proactive relationship building, maybe for a reason, maybe not, but not necessarily for a specific reason, as opposed to sort of the lobbying, which is like, we're being very targeted, specifically targeting certain departments, certain politicians, certain whatever, for a very specific goal. So I feel like there's some separation, and we're not like really an agency that does the hardcore lobbying. I don't want to play that game anymore. It's like, you need to be in that world 100%, and you need to know people.
Yeah, like, you think about public relations as we've talked about it before, right? And defined the practice of managing communication between an organization and its publics.
Yeah.
Government is one of your publics. And I think, to your point, there's 2 routes. There's this lobbying, and lobbying plays a role in many organizations and is important.
Very
and I think
important,
what's been interesting, especially right now with a lot of our tourism-based clients, as they seek to get funding in a really crazy time, and they seek to interact with their governments at many levels, they come in hot on the lobbying side without doing government relations first.
Right.
So they have not developed a relationship. They have never talked to these individuals before. They come in hot. They're asking for $1 million to build the greatest pathway that you ever seen in your life. And the government official goes, who are you? What is
Yeah.
this organization? What do you
Right.
do? I thought this, and it's been interesting. So part of public relations is talking to your government officials. And I love the definition because it's not just about the individual that was elected or the prime minister or the premier. It's about the bureaucrats. It's
Right.
about the staff. It's about, who are the key people within a department that can help you get a meeting with a caucus or that piece. So when I think about tactics, when it comes to public relations, government relations, and not lobbying, it's things like presentations, letters, telephone town halls, online surveying, social
Polls.
media, pull that online some polls, e-newsletters, meetings, one-on-one conversations, right? You think about government officials, like they're super active on Twitter, right? What's your social media plan on Twitter? What e-newsletter? Do you have an e-newsletter specific for your government contacts? What's the presentation deck that you're going to give to every community? We're working with one regional destination marketing organization right now where government relations has become really important because of this question of lobbying. They went and tried to lobby and they got doors slammed in their face because no one knew who they were.
Right.
So now it's this back to basics of like, we're writing letters, we're scheduling presentations with groups, and we're not going to the elected officials. We're writing letters to people like the chief admin officer of a city.
Right.
Or, that staff member that's in charge of putting stuff on the agenda for a committee of the whole. So that to me is that relationship build with your government. You've told this story before, I think on this podcast even, but I worked in a constituency office as a constituency manager for a number of years. I was a gatekeeper to my boss, who was a minister and extraordinarily busy. And there was one real estate agent who every month sent me a letter, and not me, sent my boss a letter, I read it, that talked about the housing market in the constituency. And it was fascinating. It was great information. He had nothing he needed from me. But when it came time where he did need something, I knew who he was.
Right.
So as the gatekeeper,
the groundwork was laid, and then he can come with an ask, right?
He got the meeting, no problem, because it's like, this guy has been providing my boss really valuable information, and she used that. She brought that to meetings. Okay, I'm reporting on this month, and it was valuable.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think similar to media relations, government relations is all about long-term view, building relationships, proactivity. It's not, oh, I need a minister, I need a meeting with the premier tomorrow. I mean, yeah, you can hire a lobbyist if you absolutely critically need a meeting with the premier tomorrow, and you can maybe get a meeting if what your meeting is about is important to the politician or matters to the public, whatever. But so there is exceptions, but generally speaking, it's like you need to build those relationships over time, to Christina's point, without an ask. And this is like basic sales kind of stuff, right? It's like, don't come in hot with asks right away, and have expectations. It's like politicians are more busy than media even and have, what I mean? Their time is really, really all over the place. They have 100 different meetings on 100 different topics a day. And it's like, you need to do a lot of laying the groundwork in order for you to be moved up the priority list and in the visibility list of that politician. And government relations from a PR perspective doesn't necessarily, to Christina's point, mean necessarily talking to politicians. Sometimes maybe it's, hey, you know what, we're going to put a poll out, and we're going to put that poll in the media, and the public's going to be talking about this poll. Now all of a sudden the politician sees this poll. And now it's like, okay, now you've just educated indirectly. And then now you're building a relationship, and maybe you're sending that poll information to the politician in a letter saying, hey, this is some information that we have for you. We'd love to be able to talk to you about this more and get into it, whatever. That is a very effective way to build a relationship and get a meeting. And then maybe talk about your issues, right? Because you've created this awareness, you've created this public discourse, this dialogue, something that might impact that politician or they might care about. Now you're having a completely different conversation, right?
It's true. We do a lot of polling as a tactic on the value of tourism side in that public relations piece. And that polling and awareness in the community becomes embedded in every key message after that, the presentation to the government, the whatever. And we have an amazing relationship and pollster that we use that actually does a lot of political polling throughout the country. And so for, you know, X organization to be able to say to Mrs. Politician, hey, that guy you used for your election campaign, that's who we used for this poll. Yeah. And so there's credibility built into there. There's something interesting there from a government relations perspective that we won't go there. But, you know, those things are important. And all of a sudden this poll is carrying some weight. Hey, 93% of your constituents have told us that tourism is the most important or one of the top 3 industries in our community. All of a sudden that politician, wait, my constituents said that 93%. So if I go to bat on this tourism issue, you're telling me 93% of people consider that okay? Like, it's like not lobbying, but beginning to kind of get in the head of that particular public.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, that's government. Obviously, we're talking about sort of full stakeholders and all the stakeholders. So what are some of the others?
So stakeholder relations.
Yeah.
So I like this definition. Stakeholder relations is the practice of forging mutually beneficial connections with third-party groups and individuals that have a stake in your common interest. Yeah. Stakeholder relations management includes communicating with people, and I love this, early and often, so that they fully understand the benefits of the project. What's not in this definition, but in a definition in a presentation I have about stakeholder relations, is the big benefit here is that even if you're doing something that didn't line up with what all those stakeholders said, they've been brought down a path, right? Early and often you're communicating. They've been brought down a path where they can see your rationale. Okay, I didn't want it to be 100%, or I wanted it to be 100%, and they're only delivering 75. But throughout this conversation, I can see why it's been scaled back to this, or why it's been scaled up. So that piece. So
who might those stakeholders be? Those third-party stakeholders? Do you have a list?
Oh, well, you're putting me on the spot. For me, stakeholders are anyone who is considered not your general public. So your stakeholders could be a community group. So the community association. So I sit on the Bowness Community Association. We would be a very important stakeholder group for any major developer coming in and building. And we have 2 new communities going up right beside our community. We were a significant part of stakeholder and still are stakeholder communications, because we are considered not the general public of our community that we live in, but leaders in our community. So those things, think about chambers of commerce that might be affected, community associations, any of like leaders, right? So maybe there's individuals that you know in a community that you're going to do business with, or you're trying to get into, that have a big clout, right?
An interest in what you're doing, right?
Yeah. So those people, sometimes I call these ones the informed public, right? So you have your
or the affected public, the directly affected public.
Yeah. So any of those, traditionally they're part of a big group, right? Or traditionally they're one individual that represents a larger group. Sometimes in politics, these are some of those PACs, those political action
committees.
Yeah. So someone who has a specific issue. Again, I'll use Bowness as a example. We have a berm that the city has said they want built through the community, and all of those neighbors have formed a society, basically. So they have a particular opinion on this berm. They have become a very important stakeholder for the city and for the government in the communications process, because they know these people are influential in our community.
Right. Yeah, it might also be like something as simple as like your neighbors, or you do have a plant or a factory or something, and you're planning to do an expansion, or you're planning to, so everybody around you that has to like approve your development permit is a stakeholder in your current situation.
Those guys more like community relations.
Okay, fair enough.
I would go into that, but stakeholders are kind of those ones that probably have their own reach, right? Like your neighbor probably his reach is like the neighbor beside him.
Right.
Whereas your stakeholders are people that have a list that could reach even further and, you know, potentially push your message out. So we often think about negative, positive stakeholders. I'm going to use Métis Crossing as an example here. Their stakeholders are people like Explore Edmonton, Go East Edmonton, all those little like
Travel Alberta, right? Like even the bigger ones, right? Yeah.
Those tourism things. So the great thing that we partner with on Métis Crossing is building stakeholder relations kits.
Right.
So every time there's a new campaign that's hitting, we create key messages, suggested social media posts, things that can empower them to tell the message of Métis Crossing. And so
and we do a lot of that kind of stakeholder relations work where it's actually not a negative thing. It's actually a positive thing. And it's about arming your champions with information so they can help you be consistent with the story you're trying to tell and get across, right?
Totally. Your stakeholders are this super powerful group. And that's why when times are bad, it's like, yeah, you need to talk to them because they could sink you. But when times are good, like these people can like lift you up and like Bowness Community Association, they could put a letter in the community-wide newsletter stating support. They have thousands upon thousands of people on social media. If there's something that a stakeholder has given them, like City of Calgary, we're one of their stakeholders, it's like we share those messages. So yeah, it could be positive or negative, but often it's positive. And I think people forget you should communicate when things are good too.
Well, that's actually when you should communicate, because then when things are bad, you've now built up some good rapport and some goodwill. That's actually the entire purpose of good public relations, is creating goodwill proactively, so that when it hits the fan, you have people in your corner that are going to have your back. Like that is like fundamentally, if you're going to think about PR and why you should do it, that is the reason you should do it, in my opinion anyways.
It's true.
And then quickly, just on this topic, just to close off, I mean, there's some other publics that you may want to consider in your PR plan.
Well, we forgot community relations.
Oh, sorry, community relations.
Peter just wants this topic to be over because I'm the expert at it. Do you want to do community relations?
Go ahead, community relations.
So community relations definition, community relations is an essential function of any successful business. It refers to the various methods companies use to establish and maintain mutually beneficial relationships in the communities that they operate.
Well, that was going to be where I was going with that anyway. So
there you go. See, I'm ahead of you. So community relations is that more, I think I tend to go back to my energy days where it's like, okay, the community I operate in, they're building whatever, a meter station or a well site in a community, and community relations becomes really important. But community relations is also, who's that general public in the area in which you want to talk to, and what do they need to know to become equipped to tell your story?
Right. And it's like, and then I guess maybe I don't know the answer to this question, but is things like employee communications and things like investor communications, does that fall under community in your definition in your mind, or is that are those separate stakeholders then in addition to?
Yeah, I think the definition of your community can very much be internal or investor,
or clients, right? Like, so I'm turning your clients into champions. Right now, PR is huge when it comes to obviously having referrals and people giving testimonials and things like that, right? So that word of mouth advertising, that's a huge community that you need to be tapping into, right?
Yeah, I think like the good way to think about stakeholder versus community for me is like mass communication versus one-on-one.
Right.
So if you're in a company with 5 people, probably those 5 people are your stakeholders because you're communicating with them one-on-one. You need to create buy-in.
But they're internal stakeholders.
Forward. Yeah, they're internal stakeholders, but you're probably dealing with them in a different way.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're in a company, let's use a big Amazon, there's no way your leadership team is going to communicate with every single person.
Right.
There's a mass communication aspect to your internal communication. So your internal community relations. So, maybe as a company, you're doing a podcast that is internally based because you have 100,000 employees, and how can they better, connect with you as a business owner? Is it a poster or a notice that's,
or town halls, right? Like CEOs visiting
open
employees, doing an open houses or whatever, right? Yeah, there's various tactics there.
Yeah, so that stakeholder, like the way I'd kind of cut that is, stakeholder is about, you're probably having some one-on-one time or some one-to-many if it's a group. Your community relations is about, that broader broadcast of your message. And yeah, I think 100%, maybe your community is an investor community and there's certain tactics. You're probably not talking to all of your investors one-on-one unless something went really terribly wrong.
You hope not to be, as much as possible, I think.
Same with your internal staff, right? You're probably not talking to every single employee all the time about things, but you're needing some mass piece that isn't about, whether it's internal or external, it's not about selling them something. It's about brand reputation. It's about maintaining that positive feeling and maintaining the relationship.
Or even, I'll go even a step further. It could be about culture and values, right? Like if you think about, like we talk a lot about culture and values at CIPR Communications and internally at staff meetings and whatever. And so like, that's an important community relations piece that we are doing as we're building our company, right? And trying to instill those cultures and values into what we do, right? And then we talk to we mention those values and that culture to our onboarding process, right? And to help our clients understand what they can expect from us and how we expect to behave, right? And so like that all kind of translates as well.
Yeah, no, it's true. So public relations, not just media, but government relations, stakeholder relations, community relations.
Yes.
There you have it.
There you have it, folks.
We're like just looking at who's going to close. So follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, CIPR Comms. Watch for the next episode. Really interested to hear how you guys are using the different aspects of public relations, or if you even knew. So leave us a comment on this posted podcast. Thank you.
Bye.